Namaste, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Bharat Varta podcast. The nation will celebrate one of its most popular festivals in a week. The Ganesh Utsav unites people from across India, and we thought it's only right for us to dedicate an episode to its cultural context and also discuss the broader significance. Joining me today in this discussion, we have Amit Paranjpe, who people follow for all things technology and Pune on Twitter. He'll speak about the Ganesh Utsav in Maharashtra, where it is immensely popular. Hi, Amit. Good to have you on the podcast.
Hi, Roshan. Great to be here.
We also have Vivek Khaitan, who you've heard recently on an episode on the Ram Janmabhoomi movement. Vivek is a farmer entrepreneur and also a history buff. We'll hear from him how the festival has evolved over time. Hi, Vivek. Nice to have you back.
Thanks a lot, Kerry. Great to be back again.
Awesome. So I guess to begin with, let's discuss our fondest memories of the festival. So maybe we can begin with you, Amit. What are your fondest memories of the Ganesh Utsav?
Yeah, thanks again, Kerry. I think Ganesh Utsav, as you mentioned, is especially popular in Maharashtra, and within Maharashtra, it's especially a very, very big deal in Pune, because that's where the modern version of Ganesh Utsav public celebration started under Tilak over 130 years back. But going back to my memories, as I said, it's such a big festival. There is what you do at your home. You have your own puja. You have your own Ganpati for a fixed number of days now. While the public celebrations go on for 10 days, at home, Ganpatis are kept for a different number of days. So for some people, keep it for 1.5 days. So it's actually the next day evening is when you do the Visarjan. Some for 5, some for 7. So there are those variations. But at home, you do puja, you do aarti, you get friends and relatives coming over to your place. You have prasad, and it's a celebrations atmosphere out there. And then, of course, in Pune, very fond memories of walking out during the day and also especially at night to check out all the Ganpati mandals, the famous Ganpati mandals. And historically, they have been doing a great job of setting up huge pandals, mandals as we call them here, and with fancy decorations and lighting. Some of the most famous ones that people would have heard of are the Dagdu Shet Halwai Ganpati, which we'll talk about a little bit later as well, Mandai and few others. Some of the sets that they create are just amazing. Also, many mandals do a good job of showcasing specific issues that are very relevant to that particular point of time. So, for example, this year is a very odd year where we will not have public celebrations, probably for the first time. But in the past, whenever you have had wars, you have had epidemics, you have had other kinds of issues, other social issues, the mandals have gone out of their way to showcase some of these issues in their displays. So that's another thing. But it's actually one of the best times to visit here in Pune. We get a lot of not just relatives at home, but all over Pune, a large number of visitors come here. And the pinnacle and the best part of this festival is the nearly 48-hour Ganpati Visarjan procession, which starts on Anant Chaturdashi on the 10th day, and that is absolutely spectacular here in Pune. And that's again something that I would love to talk about a little bit later on the program. So great memories, huge crowds, and something to look forward to every year.
Okay. Vivek?
Yeah, so Kerry, I grew up in Sitamarhi in Bihar, where Ganesh Chaturthi is not as big a festival as some of the others like Chhath or Saraswati Puja or Durga Puja is. So the memories that I have of Ganesh Chaturthi is more related, to within celebration within our family, where we used to set up, a small Ganesha, and it used to be set up for about 5 days in our home, and then it was, taken out in a procession for Visarjan. I remember, collecting money for some of the public celebrations and functions and setting up. So there used to be a Ganesh Puja Samiti that I was part of, and we used to go around, collect money and collect, substances and things for conducting that puja. And it was all great fun. I mean, the kind of fun that we don't see as much now, even in places like Sitamarhi, where festivals have a completely different color compared to larger cities. But even there, some of the rivalry, some of the joy of the festival, with the festival that one used to associate, is on the decline.
Right. I mean, listening to the both of you, I mean, I'm realizing how much of our experience is sort of common, right? I mean, even here, growing up in Bangalore, I can remember any number of things that we used to do. Of course, for kids, I mean, it was a great time because plenty of sweets were made at home. Like here, I mean, we had things like kadubu, holige, and so on. It was also a time for us to get new clothes, new items, and stuff like that. There was also this. I'm not sure if you guys had the same thing. I mean, there was this ritual of yenne snana, which was basically an oil bath, right? So we got dunked in oil in the morning, and then our parents would get behind us to clean up and wear our best clothes, right? Then going with your parents, getting the Gauri Ganesha idol. There was a lot of. I mean, it was a very familiar atmosphere. But one thing that truly stood out about Ganesha in particular, right, Ganesh Utsav in particular, was how the community came together. Because all of us kids used to go around raising, donations, funds, whatever. And it is my first experience of fundraising, so to speak, right? Where we used to, get people to part with their hard-earned money and then put together a celebration, and manage various things up until the immersion. So there was a lot of camaraderie involved, and it was so much more than a festival in some sense, right? So
yeah, I think there are two things that you added. I think I'll expand on that a little bit in Pune. Of course, the fundraising was an integral part, and it was a very community-driven festival, the public version of it, right? Whether it was a small apartment, a large apartment complex, a neighborhood, a lane, or a big area of the city, right? You had these public Ganpati mandals at various levels, So starting at just a small apartment complex with some 8-10 residents or families to something which is very, very big, right? And community was the key, right? So basically, all 10 days you had a lot of community-driven events as well. So if it was a small apartment, you would have all kinds of talent performances, shows, whether it was singing, whether it was plays, whether it was enactment. All kinds of competitions. So, it was 10 days of various kinds of camaraderie, coming together, celebrating, and working together and doing things together. Of course, the entire setup of all the decorations that were done at a small scale in smaller mandals was again a great community effort where people, especially school kids, come together and create all these kind of decorations and all that. Of course, for the bigger mandals, it was done professionally with experts and all of that, right? The other point that I didn't mention, but which is, I guess, popular with everyone, but especially with me because I'm a foodie, as you know. And like any popular festival in India, Ganeshotsav in Pune, food is a very big component of it, right? And you must have heard of what we call here as modaks, right? And modaks, and you need to have a nevedyam of those 21 modaks for the Ganpati, and we all eat lots of them. So that's another big thing and something that all of us remember, especially from our childhoods, about this festival, the food angle. And there are some other specific food items that are also made during Ganesha. So like any festival, I mean, whether it's Diwali, whether it's Dussehra, you also have food memories associated with these festivals when you grow up, right?
Right.
So yeah, I think there's a lot of things that we can talk about in further detail here.
The interesting thing, Carrie, about festivals is that they are the lifeblood of Indian civilization in particular, and pagan civilizations, which is pre-Abrahamic era pagan civilizations in general. I mean, in our times, we talk a lot, about religion. When we talk a lot about, belief or high philosophy. But Indian civilization is a testimony to the fact that the lived reality of religion for people is in festivals and not in either belief or in high philosophy.
I think that's a good point, Vivek.
Yeah, no, that's especially poignant for something which is a dharmic way of life as well, right? Because everything is so individualistic in some sense for us, right? Your mileage may vary, kind of an approach, which is a truly pluralistic way of thinking about like relating to the supreme or whatever. Instances like this, where different people come together for a common activity, is definitely something that is to be treasured for sure. So Amit, we spoke about some of the context to the festival, the rituals, and so on and so forth, right? The festival also became sort of a major social and public event a few centuries back, before the British. Can you help us understand a little bit of the historic context as well?
Yeah, so I think the Ganpati festival has been big in Maharashtra for a few centuries, going back to the Shivaji and Peshwa era as well. And Ganpati as a god has, some of the temples and some of the history associated with it goes back further, even 1,000 years back. But let's fast forward to the 17th and 18th centuries. 17th century, especially in the 18th century, Ganesh festival, Ganpati festival was quite big in Maharashtra, and again, especially here in Pune, which in the 18th century became the de facto capital of the Maratha Empire when Bajirao set up Shanwarwada and shifted over here. In the Peshwa era, this was a huge festival celebrated with a lot of pomp and splendor in Shanwarwada, as well as all the other vadas of the big sardars of the Peshwas, right? And there are some very good descriptions available today made by historians. These are actual records from that era, both made by the local officials of that time, as well as by some British visitors. And through that, we get a very good insight of how exactly the festival was celebrated back then, down to minute details. So we have excellent historical records from about 250 years back onwards. And through that, we realized that this was a big deal. There were festivities going on for 10 days, similar to what we do right now. There were processions on elephants, and especially for the Peshwas, Ganpati was probably one of their most favorite and top gods. So they put particular, they were they were religious, and they were into all kinds of festivals, but especially Ganesh festival got special significance during that era. So we have a lot of details around that, and that entire celebrations came to an abrupt end in 1818, right? So basically 1817 is when, after the Third Anglo-Maratha War, is when the British captured Pune. This was in November of 1817, and the war eventually ended in 1818 with the exile of Bajirao II. But so I guess you can make a point that 1817 Ganeshotsav was the last major Ganeshotsav in Pune for nearly 100 years, right? Because after that, the British came over, many of the Sardars of the Peshwa also moved on, and Ganesh festival pretty much disappeared from Pune. People continued to celebrate it in their homes, like they do even now, but the public festivities just completely stopped and died down. Now, what happened was interesting. In the meantime, the tradition of Pune had migrated to through the entire Maratha Empire into places like Indore, Gwalior, Vadodara, where the Gaikwads were there, and all the other areas, right? So, and because some of these kingdoms or some of these principalities had struck deals with the British, and the local, rulers continued, the festivities did continue there to some extent. So it's very interesting that in I'll fast forward to 1892, and there were a few people from Pune who had visited Gwalior in the recent past at that time, probably 1890, 1891. And they came back to Pune and started talking about how Ganeshotsav is a big deal and celebrated with a lot of pomp and splendor publicly in Gwalior, near the palace and around the palace and all that. And the Pune people started thinking, and of course, I mean, there was historical documentation about the fact that Shanwarwada saw something similar 80, 90 years back. So they said, why can't we set up a public festival here in Pune as well? So there were two or three key leaders. There was a Khasgiwale, I forgot the names. I'll get the names to you in a bit. In fact, I have them right here. Khasgiwale, Kottavadekar, and Shri Bhau Rangari. So they set up what was Pune's first public Ganpati Mandal and a public celebration in 1892. Right? And so Bhau Rangari, which continues to have their public festivities even today, is credited as being the first public Ganpati Mandal in Pune. So this is a trick question. Did Tilak set up the first Mandal? No, actually it was set up by these three guys. But Tilak, who at that time was already probably the biggest leader in Pune, one of the biggest leaders in India, quickly saw the potential of this. And he got involved in this. And the next year, 5 big public mandals were set up, which included the famous Dagdushet Halwai Mandai and Tilak's own Kesriwada. And then Tilak made this a mission to make this popular, not just in Pune, but even outside Pune, in Bombay of that time and all over India. So yes, Tilak is definitely credited with making this into a big public festival. And Tilak, as we know, we talked a lot about Tilak last week when we were celebrating his 100th Punyatithi. He was a man of who wanted to drive social change, and he wanted obviously his goals were political, but he wanted the revival of the old Indian culture, the old Indian philosophy, and make that the cornerstone. He wrote a slight digression, but he wrote his famous Gita Rahasya, right? And the whole objective of that was focusing on a call to action. Right? He wanted people to understand Gita and the ancient and the not so ancient Hindu Dharma as something that focuses on action. And he wanted people to come together, to get together, to not hide some of these festivities, not shy away from them, which is what 3 generations of probably not just Punekar, but all of Indians were doing when the British had sort of taken charge, right? So this was part of his grand revival. The Shiva Jayanti also started around the same time. That was another thing to get people together. And so Tilak basically helped take it to the next level in terms of making it a public festivity, not just in Pune, but all over India. So in that sense, yes, he needs to be credited as the person who took it public, even though he didn't set up the first one per se.
Yeah.
So, Carrie, I will, sort of take a step back from what Amit had said and try to, put it in a larger historical context as to why the festivals became one of the vehicles for political action, starting with 1890s. I mean, you see, once British, assumed supreme power in India from the Marathas around, 1818, after the War of 1818. There had been, skirmishes here and there, which, sort of goes till about 1857, where the old elites of India, sort of still kind of fought with British and tried to regain power. But that old elite is completely decimated in the 1857 war, right? 1857, in fact, was perhaps the last high point or the only high point of Hindu-Muslim unity in many ways, where, one of the Farmans of Bahadur Shah Jafar said that if Hindus come and cooperate with us in, slaying Englishmen, then Muslims should not kill cows. And those Muslims who do not follow this would be considered an apostate and those who eat beef would be considered as someone who is as if they have eaten pork, So 1857 is the time when the old elites, both Hindus and Muslims, come together to fight British. And that fight obviously ended in, defeat for Indian forces. From then on, it's almost as if the old politics of India has died and a new politics emerges in 1870s. With printing press coming, there's this new form of politics of, printing your viewpoints, ideologized politics, writing, long papers on different issues of the day, trying to gain power within the British administration through agitation. And you see a lot of constitutional reforms, which starts coming in from 1880s onwards due to that agitation. One of the important aspects of that period is that the Hindu and Muslim politics started getting divided completely. So you see the emergence of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan on the Muslim politics side, and he was being cultivated by British, and the divide and rule policy that one talks about is something that one can see there very, very prominently. So this entire Aligarh movement, which Sir Syed Ahmad Khan started, took the Muslim politics in a completely different direction, which was basically in the direction of cooperation with the British. Whereas with the formation of Congress and with the with the emergence of Tilak, especially, one sees that Hindu politics of the time starts going in the direction which it was, which only sort of gets strengthened later on much more, which is in the direction of anti-British or self-rule. One of the less remarked or less understood things about British rule is the Christian character of it. So the entire 19th century is basically, in a way, a contest between ancient culture of India and the new Christian character of the British rule. Right. So the socio-religious reform and revival movements of 19th century that we see has all kinds of flavors. So there is Brahmo Samaj on the one side, which is in a way, trying to respond to the times by co-opting some of the aspects of Christianity, and is kind of a mongrel between Hindu culture and Christianity in many ways. Then there is movements like Arya Samaj, which is very, very fundamental in character and says that Vedas, that one has to go back to Vedic roots, and everything else after that is a corruption. Then lots of social interventions, widow remarriage, education of children. Education becomes a big focus. So all of these forces are playing out, and around 1890s, there is some confidence which comes in the emerging new elite of India, that British rule is not something that we need to sort of countenance forever, and that we need to slowly start getting into at least participation, if not outright self-rule, which comes later in the 20th century. And that's where the Hindu imagery is something which Tilak utilizes in order to fire up the imagination for home rule.
Yeah, I think we have discussed Tilak extensively last few weeks, but this is well known that there was this split of two ideologies between Tilak and Gokhale in Congress, and both Punekars, both were teaching at Ferguson College, both knew each other quite well. And in fact, before Gokhale, it was Tilak's classmate at the Deccan College, Agarkar. So those ideologies was essentially a representation of exactly what Vivek said. There were these two dominant schools of thought, right? Even amongst Indians. British obviously were playing their own games to influence these. But even amongst Indians, there were these two schools of thought which said, one said that, we have to get freedom at all costs. We have to get back to our culture. We have had this imperialism that needs to be removed, right? In all forms, right? I mean, that was the Tilak view. And then there was the other more moderate view of social reform, which said, we have some issues to deal with at our end. Let's fix that first, and we can focus on independence a little bit later, right? I mean, that was essentially the moderate view that Gokhale and before him, Mahadev Govind Ranade had espoused, right? And that debate was a big factor in Pune, as you can imagine, at that time. And as Vivek was suggesting, Tilak was very focused on reviving. I mean, in that sense, you can. That's a separate discussion. I'm not really an expert on that, but you can draw some parallels between Tilak and Vivekananda as two of the original folks of the late 19th century who were sort of seeking a revival of the old Indian, the old Hindutva culture, which had sort of been you can argue that was pushed down by the British, and maybe before that through the centuries of foreign domination as well, right? So that was part of it, and this whole you know uh, festivals and public celebrations and all that was part of it, and his writings were part of it. And since you mentioned Tilak and some of this people do brand Tilak, the people who have opposed Tilak back then, and even now sometimes say he was too conservative and all of it. And that's not true. I mean, in person, he was for reform. He was for moderate views, but his overarching view was very clear. He wanted to preserve our ancient culture, and he wanted the British out, right? And that sort of was his primary priority. There are people who say that Tilak was conservative and orthodox. That's extremely far from truth, because if you look at some of the lesser known aspects of Tilak, he was a huge fan, and I would argue even a well-studied man on science and technology. I mean, if you look at some of his extensive writings in Kesari and Maratha, which he ran for so many years, there's a lot of discussion about science and technology and entrepreneurship. He talks extensively about not just mechanization and mass production. He also gets into details of biology and microbiology in the context of the plague epidemic, which hit Mumbai and Pune in 1896-97. So he was a brilliant man and was very focused on the modern technologies on one hand, but he was also very clear that we need to get people together, and let's not forget who we are in the first place. And British should not overrun our culture. I think that was one of his overarching themes as well. And to that extent, he was very focused on making sure that festivals like the Ganesh festival was celebrated in a big way.
Yeah, so another act of political sort of cultural diffidence was also, I think, the founding of RSS, right? In 1925, I think one of the first things they did was take out the Ganesh procession in 1927, which I think Hegdewarji himself led. You want to talk about that, Vivek or Amit?
I mean, Vivek can take it. I would study that in detail, but I'll just make a point and then maybe turn it over to Vivek. But I mean, the whole separate discussion about RSS and Savarkar and what was their ideology and inspiration to start with. But one point, since we've been talking about Tilak, I'll make one more point there. You can argue that Tilak was, in a sense, one of the primary sources of inspiration for Savarkar as well, in many respects, when it came to some of these aspects, and maybe to some extent even to RSS. And I have not read that portion in detail, but in some sense, you can argue that it was at least in some aspects a continuation of the vision that Tilak had laid out, and what he was aspiring for, that continued at least in some form in that area. But again, maybe Vivek can add to it.
Yeah. So I'll give you a brief background as to what was the environment in India at the time when RSS was founded. And RSS is, Tilak is in many ways, a successor to the Maratha Empire in terms of his aspirations for India. And RSS in many ways is a legatee of Tilak in terms of, their own worldview about how India has to, go ahead. RSS was founded in a very bleak environment in India at that point. So Gandhi had come back to India in 1915, and he had led a mass agitation. And in order to forge Hindu-Muslim unity against the British for that mass agitation, he had included Khilafat as one of the pillars for the non-cooperation movement that he launched in 1920. So that's perhaps the only time in the entire struggle for freedom when we see Muslim mass politics or Muslims joining the mass politics in India. But the reason for that was different, which is basically something happening in Turkey and not something which is happening in India, right? Now, for reasons known to him, on which one can speculate, Gandhi took that very, very successful non-cooperation movement back after the Chauri Chaura incident in 1922. And after that, cases were sort of put on him, and he was jailed for a while. And then he said that people were not ready for a himsa, so he first of all needs to prepare the masses for his way of satyagraha satyagraha politics before launching any agitation and asking British to go away. So at that point, again, people like Motilal Nehru and C.R. Das, who were into constitutional politics of the time, which was also another line of politics which was, considerable and has given a lot in terms of movement towards freedom to India. So that was what sort of starts taking shape again. It was in that environment where the public was dispirited. Gandhi had sort of gone back into his shell, and constitutional politics, which was the old politics of 1890s and 1910s, apart from Tilak, is what was going on. It was in that environment that Hedgewar, in many ways, as I said, one of the legatees of Tilak's idea of India, founded Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh in 1925 and adopted a lot of methods to fire the masses, so to say, and instill faith and belief and pride in one's culture, that he adopted a lot of methods of Tilak as well. So you see in 1927 that the Shiv Jayanti and the Ganesh Chaturthi, Ganapati Puja and everything starts coming back again in the late 1920s.
Right. So you could say that, earlier it was an act of political diffidence or an assertion of cultural values and so on. I have a more broader question when it comes to festivals in today's India, right? Like in a modern, resurgent India that we're living in. Why are rituals important from a civilization perspective? Any of you can take this.
Yeah. So let me go first. I think this is something on which both will have our views. So you see, when we talk about religion or culture, especially religion, there is a lot of conversations around belief, which is a very, very Abrahamic concept in many ways, but that has seeped into ways of talking about Indian religions as well. Or if you want to really give a lot of respect to Indian religions, then we'll talk about philosophy. So people will talk about Vedanta or Sankhya, or if they talk about Buddhism, then they'll talk about Mahayana and Hinayana kind of philosophies. But for the large masses of people, either the questions of belief or of philosophy are not important. That's not how, that's something that appeals to brain, right? That's not something which is your lived reality. And that's not how Indians throughout their history have experienced their religion and culture. It has always been through rituals and festivals which sort of personified the existence of their religion for them. And that's why if you take out rituals, festivals away from Indian civilization, or for that matter pre-Abrahamic pagan civilizations of the other parts of the world, then there's nothing left. All the questions of the day, and it's not as if these festivals and rituals were static. As we have discussed as to how Tilak used Ganesh Utsav as one of the levers for political mobilization. The important questions of the day, whether that related to politics of the day or to the socio-cultural aspects, the questions of the day, they have been debated, discussed, and thrashed out in those festivals, in those larger festivals all the time. It's not something, even today you see, for example, obviously it comes from, a lot of hatred towards Indian civilization and culture, but you see questions about, let's say, water uses during Holi, right? Now, these are the kind of questions which have always been debated, discussed, which had led to modifications, adaptations throughout the centuries in Indian culture.
Yeah, in some sense, it's also, I would say, like a nation state in itself is a covenant, right? Where we have decided to, abide by certain responsibilities in exchange of certain rights and protection, right? And it's also, a responsibility for us to reinforce our civilizational values through all of these simple acts, right? And considering also that, the dharmic view is very, very, like as I mentioned earlier as well, individualistic, look within kind of a thing. These are acts that bring the communities together. So So it has a broader significance in that sense. So I wanted to talk about how the festival has itself evolved, right? And also, I mean, considering that we are in extremely special circumstances right now, under the pandemic and so on and so forth. How do you think this will impact the celebrations, let's say in Pune, Amit?
Yeah, so as I said, so two things. First is how it has evolved, and then let me come to this year. It's a special year, but over the last few decades, the festival has evolved and it's gotten bigger, right? I mean, as Pune city itself has gotten bigger, we have a lot more mandals, and economically also Pune city, which was a small city not too many decades back, and not a big commercial center like Mumbai at that time, has changed significantly. Now it's a big metro, and ultimately, a lot of these big public celebrations that we used to see when we were growing up in Mumbai, not as much in Pune, have now come to Pune as well, with the associated growth in the economy of the city as well. So in that sense, the scale, the festivities, the decorations are all much bigger. Of course, technology has been added to it now. During some of the Visarjan celebrations, we have seen laser shows and like that being used as well. When we were growing up about 30, 40 years back, moving lights was a big attraction. It was a new thing at that time. So things have changed a lot. There have been some traditions that have been around for many years. Some of them have changed for various reasons. I'll go back to your original question at the beginning of this podcast. Early memories. So in the 70s and 80s, the procession used to start for Ganpati Visarjan on Chaturdashi, and it was led by an elephant. And it was a very popular elephant in Pune from the local zoo for many decades. I think her name was Sumitra. I may be wrong, but again, that was a tradition that in 1892, what Khasgiwale had probably seen in Gwalior, and what was seen outside Shadwarwada if you were there before 1817, right? So that added to the pomp. You had a big elephant walking and leading the procession, if you will, and then the five Manatse Ganpati, starting with the Kasba Ganpati, the oldest Ganpati established by Shivaji's mother in the 17th century, and the other four, including Kesriwada. So I mean, that was part of the splendor. Unfortunately, that elephant passed away in the 80s or early 90s, I think, and since then that tradition hasn't continued. So that was one aspect of it. The other more modern aspect of it, and this also goes back to some of the points that Vivek was making, I think, whether it's rituals, whether it's various ceremonies and all that, I think that becomes an important part of the culture. And that also becomes a way for us to showcase our rich civilization and its history, not just to our own people, but to the entire world, right? And to that extent, what we have seen over the last few years, I would say 2-3 decades in Pune, is an increasing global attention to this festival. So, every year we have seen more and more foreign tourists come in here. Now, of course, this goes back to this whole, marketing India as a tourist destination, and you could do a separate podcast on that. And we obviously need to do a lot better in that area. But I think that's a great opportunity for us. That number as it is growing, and it's a great spectacle which mixes so many things simultaneously. So if we can attract, I mean, obviously we get a lot of people from all over India, but even international tourists come to watch the spectacle over the 10-day period and all that. So that's quite interesting. So in that sense, it can evolve into something which is much bigger and a showcase for the entire Indian culture, and something for us to proudly show to the whole world. We're taking steps in that direction, and I think it hopefully will continue. Now, going back to your earlier question about this year. Now, this year is unfortunately probably the first time, I think, since 1892 in Pune that we are not going to have a big public celebration. some of the more established and popular mandals have already shown leadership, starting with Dagdushet Halwai, the biggest one in Pune, by saying that they are not going to have public celebrations. They are not even going to erect a public pandal. They have a temple where Dagdushet Ganpati is located all through the year. And the Ganpati is going to be there and the puja is going to be performed there. But, they're not going to encourage thousands of devotees who queue every year. So in that extent, and Pune, as you probably know, has been particularly hit by COVID-19 pandemic. We have had some of the highest numbers in the country over the past few weeks. So Pune, more than probably many other cities around India, needs to be especially careful around this. And our mayor, Honorable Mayor Shri Moore from BJP, showed good leadership there early on by basically saying that, we don't want a big celebrations happening this year. So this year is going to be different. Hopefully by next year, things will be quite different. Hopefully we'll have a good vaccine and things will look much better, and we'll be back in a big way. I did hear that Mumbai may have a little low-key, but probably a little bit more than Pune. I don't know about the other cities. Maybe I don't know what's going to happen in Bengaluru or Delhi or elsewhere.
Right. So Vivek, these festivals are also a way of showcasing our culture to the world, as Amit also mentioned. And there's a significant economic impact as well, right? I mean, this is a time usually that families make their purchases, and there are businesses and industries that earn a lot, right? And even artisans and so on. So how do you think that aspect will play out this year? And what do you think we should do to make this grander in scale as the years go by?
So as Amit was saying that this year is very, very different, of course, due to pandemic, and the public celebrations are a complete no-no. I mean, as we saw during Puri Jagannath Rath Yatra, which happens every year in June, that the public celebration part of it is not something which is advisable. And in that sense, this year is very, very different. But for Rath Yatra, the Rath Yatra part of it is essential to that entire festival, and so that still took place. As far as Ganeshotsav is concerned, the public celebration aspect of it is something which is not essential to it, in the sense that it can be done at home also, right? So it's only by doing that we make these festivals vibrant, and obviously, there is a whole economy around it. So this is something that will have to be done next year, pandemic permitting, of course. And there is a whole ecosystem. I mean, this is something which is true of every Indian festival. That there is a whole festival economy around it, especially for people who are low wage earners. That festivals are a great time for them to earn some money for them. So one would hope that this comes back next year in much grander fashion. And the public celebration aspect of this is not something which is forgotten. Obviously, nobody will forget it in 1 year. If anything, people would be more keen to do it on a much grander scale once situation improves.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll be able to market the festival like the way the West does it with any of their festivals, right? Christmas, Thanksgiving, or even Valentine's Day, for example. Right, and hopefully, millions of people across the world can celebrate Ganesh Utsav someday, right? So, final closing comments, Amit. How will you celebrate the festival this year?
Yeah, so as we started, right, I think we will continue to celebrate it. All Punekars will continue to celebrate it inside their homes in a big way, like they always do. Probably even in a bigger way inside their homes, because there's not going to be a lot of activity outside homes. So they probably will have more time. Maybe we'll see more fancier decorations happening inside the house this time. I'm hopeful. And as Vivek mentioned, I think the economic impact is going to be felt this year. I mean, as he rightly said, it's a big boost to the economy for daily earners and for all kinds of professions and small businesses. And it's getting bigger. And this year is an aberration, and it's unfortunate. But next year, I hope we bounce back in a much, much bigger way. And in the coming few years and decades, I think this is something that I'm hopeful, and I think that's at least a dream I have for Pune and for India, that this becomes one of the top showcase destinations, not just in India, but to the world, where we showcase our culture, our food, our rituals, our best practices, and a lot of other representative things as well, and fundamentally drive economy as well. I mean, let's not forget that. I think anything to drive tourists and job creation and employment, I think that's more than welcome.
Yeah. All right. Thanks so much, Amit and Vivek. I'm certainly going to be looking forward to, all of the sweets, maybe fast a few days leading to it so that I can enjoy my, meals that time. Right. Thanks for all of this rich context. I'm certain that we'll celebrate this, we'll all celebrate this festival with some renewed appreciation given all of this content that you guys have put out. Right. So thanks so much for tuning in, everyone. We wish you a very, very happy Ganesha Utsav. Take care, stay safe, and see you next time.
Thanks, Carrie, and hope you get to enjoy the modaks there as well. And Vivek, you too.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for tuning in. This podcast was brought to you by the team at Bharat Varta. If you liked this podcast, then don't forget to share, subscribe, and rate us on your favorite platforms. We're available on Anchor, Apple, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, Breaker, YouTube, and a host of other platforms. We started Bharat Varta to facilitate long-form discussions on politics, policy, and culture. We don't necessarily endorse anything that was said in this episode. If you do wish to offer us any feedback on the content or anything else, do reach out to us on social media or get in touch with us on our website, www.bharatvarta.in. The links are in the description below. Thanks again for tuning in. Until next time, stay safe, take care, and Jai Hind.